So as we go along this course, we will obviously talk about climate drivers of human evolution, diaspora, speciation, and we have to also contend with the growth of the brain size evolution, and behavioral evolution. And it isn't always clear whether the constant climate that favors evolution of development, anatomical changes, adaptation, adaptability, behavior, and brain size. We'll invoke diet and so on as well. Or whether it's slow change in climate or it's the variability of climate. So we'll go through some hypotheses, and again the basic rule to remember is that when we have multiple hypotheses, it generally means we don't have a robust idea of what really works. Want to just start with this, which is another rendition from the Smithsonian, which shows evolution through time of various species 65 million years ago here, coming into the Cenozoic era. You have tertiary and quaternary period, so mostly we'll be talking about Pliocene, Pleistocene boundary, Pleistocene evolution of our ancestors and us, and then the Holocene and into the Anthropocene. And this is meant to show just how big an impact we are having, even though we arrived so late in the game in terms of the evolution of species. This is something critical. Of course, one can philosophically ask whether that's what evolution intended to do, to create a species that consumes so much energy. So the question then, going back in time, these timelines have moved. I'll report another paper that just came out that dates a cave in South Africa and moves the lines of Australopithecus back by 1 million years, I think. So looking at the delta O18, which we will discuss a little bit later on in terms of how it is a proxy for past temperature variations. This is the deep ocean benthic foram delta O18, and the main thing to remember is how the time scales of variability seen in delta O18 change over time. So we have one transition here happening into some sort of a time scale change, another change happening here, and these seem to be higher frequency, smaller amplitudes, whereas here we come to higher frequency maybe, or sorry, lower frequency and much higher amplitudes. So do these things have an impact on the evolution? So we are looking here, of course, at our ancestors, the great apes, and then bipedalism, tool building, and then behavioral changes, expertise growth, brain size evolving, and then the Anthropocene impact, use of hands much more effectively, efficiently, and then agriculture, technology, and so on. So here we have Ardipithecus in the transition from the great apes to the hominid evolution. Australopithecus and Paranthropus, who overlapped with the Homo lineages of the past that we will talk about a lot. So the question, of course, is how they evolved from each other or independently, and at what time they split off from each other, and how migration may have helped the speciation, and how expertise evolved, and what does it mean to be modern, what drove the brain size evolution, and so on and so forth. This is the change in climate and brain size, and the idea is again reversing the scale here, going from 4 million years ago to today, brain volume in centimeter cube, and climate fluctuation again in delta O18. So you can see that there was warmer climate, and then as we go towards higher oxygen isotopes, we get colder climates. We will see later on that O18 gets left behind in the ocean as glaciers grow, because glaciers lock up O16, which we will talk about when we talk about climate proxies. So here are these large amplitude fluctuations at somewhat lower frequencies with embedded higher frequencies. So the greatest climate fluctuations seem to be here, associated with greatest brain size increases. Correlations doesn't mean causality, of course, but also we will see that brain size actually decreasing in the remaining Homo lineages, that is the Homo sapiens, in the last 10,000 years, and we have to understand what that is related to as well. So the idea is that as you have cold and dry conditions and warm and moist conditions from the past to the present, the fate of the species may be that they are adaptive and versatile. So either they try and then they go extinct, or they move, so they may stay because they are versatile and adapting, but then conditions become so unfavorable that they are not generalists enough to move, so they go extinct. Whereas there are some that are able to move out of Africa, kind of hypothesis which we will look at, and they might be following habitat changes, and over time they may become versatile and deal with large fluctuations in the early and late Pleistocene, where the number of Homo species, so Australopithecus, Paranthropus, and so on, disappeared, and the large-brained Neanderthals, maybe Devonians, Floresienses, and Sapiens survived, and eventually, as the last glacial ended around 12,000 years ago, only Homo sapiens are left as far as we know. I don't think there is any Floresiensis still hiding in some cave in Indonesia or so. So these are kind of schematically indicating that we don't know whether the evolution is favored by constant climate or slowly changing climate or highly variable climate. If we want key dates, we have the tool, so we have to look at expertise in tools and how precise they got, how the brain got bigger, how behaviors changed, and how speciations happened along the way. So here we have the oldest lineages, of course, from Hayder, Turkana, Old Y, so the Paleolithic time periods, 2.36 million, so before the Pleistocene glaciations of 100,000 years started. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call that I have to take. Yes? Hello? 1534S. नीचे रख देना 1534 है. Sorry, I will try to edit that out, or maybe leave it as an indication of how it is to record things while other things are going on. So these are the more recently discovered Dmanisi, Georgia. We will look at more specifically because this extended the timeline backward in the Eurasian region, and these are the East Asian and Southeast Asian, and then also there are Australian dates, and we will see how the oldest spread of Homo to Eurasia happened 1.17 million years ago, and what are the conundrums instead of in terms of the arrival of Homo species into Europe, and what may have driven these pathways, potential climate connections, and so on. So evolutionary timeline of important anatomical, behavioral, and life history characteristics that were once thought to be associated with the origin of genus Homo, or earliest Homo erectus, going back again to 4 million years. We can look at morphology, variation, and behavior and ecology. So strong terrestrial bipedality evolved with the Pliocene-Pleistocene transition and the East African eradication, as best as we can tell. Relatively elongated hind limbs, so the bipedality came with different morphological changes in the spine, connection to the cranium, growth of the cranium, brain, etc. Reduced face and teeth, so that also changed the jaw structure, jaw muscles, and brain size and body size. Substantially reduced face and teeth. Here again transitioning, so we are going from earliest Homos to Homo erectus here, and highly encephalized brain, so large brain with complexities, neuronal connections, cerebral cortex, and so on and so forth, and increased intraspecific body size variations. Okay, so moving into behavior and ecology, initial dietary expansion, and then stone flaking and transport, so Paleolithic earliest simple tools, and then cooperative foraging, dietary expansion, so large animals, underground plants, tubers, and so on. So that potentially is also related to changes in body size and brain size, maybe high proteins, and why cooperation itself evolved in terms of maybe societal structures, behavioral changes, whether they are sociological, developmental, anatomical, brain, and whether they are driven by climate or other environmental variables or just by diet is not all clear. We will go through these things. It's always fascinating to go through what we know and try to put together a narrative. Cooperation around hearths and shelters. So more recently there are more sophisticated tools that needed heating, cooking, shaping, and more precise tools, better use of opposable thumbs, and so on, and prolonged life history here in terms of behavior and ecology, and increasing toolkit innovation and diversity. So this is from Richard Potts, who has written a lot about variability selection hypotheses and directional selection as climate changes. So hypothetically speaking, time here is going from T1 to T7, and these responses are split into contingent response, arid climates, and moist climates. And the question is, when you look at the evolution of climate in terms of variability and dryness and wetness, the argument here is that variability selection in the Mendelian population, environmental oscillation here is reflected in landscape by fluctuation in vegetation, which we will look at in chapter 6 in green, and surface water in blue. At T1, a lake fed by a river system is open in open woodland. After wet and dry extremes, surface water disappears by here. So you have desertification and arid land expansion, which we'll look at through model simulations in chapter 5. The gene pool and the associated phenotypes, which are environmentally selected genetic expressions, is divided into 1. Features favored in moist, highly vegetated settings, and 2. Features that yield higher fitness in dry, open habitats, and 3. Contingent responses, so dry and wet, so depending on the climate, the response will be accordingly favored, which are favored under novel circumstances and depend on environmental input. So more generalists than specialists. The size of the shapes under gene pool depicts relative fitness in each specific interval of time. So there is more genetic adaptation to moist conditions here, which has grown, and then it becomes more genetically fit to respond in arid conditions, and then over time, as variability or the amplitude of climate change increases, you end up with contingent response, which is referred to as variability selection. Okay. Okay, the size of the shapes under gene pool depicts the relative fitness in each specific interval of time. The dominance of genotypes that confer contingent responses over habitat-specific adaptation in T5 through T7 cannot be extrapolated from the short-term fitness results of earlier intervals. In variability selection, complex mechanisms of mediating environmental information and novel response may evolve. So this is obviously a hypothesis, and I missed a figure there, unfortunately, which again I'll come back and add. So this is again a figure from one of Richard Potts's papers, from the modified by the Smithsonian. He himself worked at the Smithsonian. This shows in a simple way the schematically environmental hypothesis of human evolution. Environmental variable of some sort could be temperature, precipitation, vegetation, landscape, water availability, humidity, and so on. So as time goes, you have stable habitat, and then you have progressive habitat change and more variable habitat. So the question is, what benefits evolution most? Is it a stable habitat? Is it a progressive habitat change? Or is it a more variable habitat? Obviously, he implies that a variable habitat is more favorable for Mendelian population selection, but this is just one hypothesis, and this question is not so easily answered. So I just wanted to add this before we move on to evolution of behavior, where again we have to contend with brain size change and figure out what is genetic adaptation, what is behavioral adaptability, and whether behavior is inherited, genetically transmitted, or is epigenetic, and so on and so forth. Okay.